and you're listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
So, I'm your co-host Mark.
And I am your Lost in the Woods co-host, Josh. What is going on, my guy?
So we're taking care of scratching Blair Witch Project off the list of movies we cover.
Yes, and we are covering this one for a couple of different reasons. First off, this is the 25th anniversary of this movie. And second off, this is going to be our closing feature at this Saturday, Winter Horrorland Film Festival in Richmond, Virginia, a amalgamation of short films and feature films that we've shown at Horrific Hope in the past, as well as vendors like Moonstone Menagerie, Twitchcraft Studios, and Love Always KB Painting. And we have a plethora of great community resources like American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Forest to Sand, Robin's Hope, Weaver Circle, Where You're At Foundation, counseling services from WHO out in Chesterfield, Richmond Behavioral Health, and Narcotics Anonymous as well. So come on down. The fun starts at 12 and it'll be held at the Richmond Public Library. But let's jump into the Blair Witch Project. What does this movie mean to you? I mean, like, what's your relationship with this movie?
So it's kind of the movie that made found footage big, made it mainstream. You have early entries like Cannibal Holocaust, the McPherson tapes, and things like that. But uh, Blair Witch Project's really what kind of made people take notice, followed very closely by Paranormal Activity. Those were like the two big ones that everybody's like, oh, yay, found footage, and kind of almost set the bar for what people expect from found footage.
Closely. There is a 10-year gap between Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity.
I mean, more closely, as in the popularity and mainstream coverage that they got.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about where found footage was in 1999 because it's such a mainstay of the genre right now where it it almost kind of felt like a a club that you had to know someone to get in. It wasn't a major thing. Blair Witch was kind of the first time that as a that I can remember that you know we really had kind of really put it on the map. I think the argument can be made for a cannibal holocaust, but I think overall, I think it was really kind of
It
this
was
film.
it was an underground genre almost for horror at the
Exactly.
time. Yeah, and as well known as Cannibal Holocaust was, a lot of that was due to the controversy around it.
Mhm.
With like, there's a scene where they kill like a tortoise, and they legit killed the tortoise for the movie. Um, and they had a few other scenes that they ended up getting investigation and had to go through like courts and stuff because they thought somebody was actually making and putting out a snuff film. That's kind of the big deal with Cannibal Holocaust. McPherson tapes never really caught on as big. It's lesser known, but it's a found footage during a birthday party
Yep.
and an alien abduction on like VHS tape back in the day. And then this comes along. It was like a $20,000 budget or something obscenely small, and recorded on like a camcorder and made hundreds of millions and is still kind of making money today.
Yeah, it's going back to the early days. Like you said, it was kind of this underground genre. You really didn't know about found footage unless you were in the thick of horror in those days. McPherson tapes have kind of in more recent years have kind of regarnered an appreciation or a newfound fan base because of platforms like Tubi, Shutter, Pluto, Screenbox, etc. And I think also the same can be said about Hannibal Holocaust as well. Whereas the Blair Witch was kind of the first one that exploded into the mainstream, where you could like it was at the height of the internet, which also was involved in its marketing. The marketing for this film is one of the best marketing that I've ever seen for any film in my lifetime.
Well,
And,
people were questioning whether it was a legit story or not.
and I think that's the beautiful thing about this film is that they not only crafted this entire mythology because there's a great companion uh documentary that goes along with this. It's a faux documentary, but it's called The Curse of the Blair Witch, and it was a hour-long special that Sci-Fi ran in conjunction with the theatrical release of Blair Witch Project. And it really it sat down with like fake historians to kind of explore the mythology, how it basically was like Maryland's version of the Blair or of the Salem witch trials. And then you also kind of interwove that into it. And I love the fact that the marketing for this is just crazy to me because they basically had the three main people, Heather, Michael, and Joshua. Basically, they could not like appear any like they had like sign waivers that they couldn't sign or promote the film for like a year. I think like they had actually somehow convinced IMDb to like list them as like legally dead. They went through like really great lengths, like they set up like missing and like information on like the website for the film. And again, I've just never seen a film campaign take those great lengths, and I think that's part of the reason that this film was the landmark success that it was, and that we now know it as today.
Yeah, and it's almost they took all okay. So they took the blueprint the McPherson tapes put out and modernized it to what it is now. Um, I mean, granted, it's nothing but a movie about people being lost in the woods and hysteria, but uh, they kind of followed the formula the McPherson tapes put out and slightly modernized it, and everything you see now follows the way Blair Witch did it. And all Blair Witch did was just slightly fine tune the formula that had already been established.
Yeah, but it brought it into the mainstream where it hadn't been before.
Right.
Um, and I mean, this is also too like not to go to soapbox, but it or just sounds like an angry old man like Mark does so often on this podcast. But this is kind of one of the things that I miss about like movies is that the Blair Witch was like it was an event. Paranormal Activity was an event, and you just don't see things like that. And I think that's kind of the reason that this movie has had the longevity that it has had is because it was a cultural touch point in 1999. Now, granted, it has spawned a video game, it has spawned TV specials, two sequels. Uh,
I, I actually like the second one.
I do too. Okay.
I feel like it's underrated because
Yeah,
it's not found footage like the first one is.
it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. It's a really unique movie. I I really was like hesitant to watch it for a while because I saw this movie way after the hype died. I've seen this movie the first time within like the last 5 years.
Like, I kind of got Blair Witch came out. I was like a senior in high school, and the person I was dating at the time, for whatever reason, they knew I was into horror. It was just like, yeah, I went and saw the Blair Witch Project with my mom. I'm like, the hell? So it was actually years later that I finally saw the Blair Witch Project.
And like I genuinely, yeah, like I tried multiple times to watch this movie, and this movie's such a slow burn that you really have to commit to kind of see the ending. Like I rewatched it this morning, and watching it, like I had actually forgotten how it ended, and like I was just like, man, like what a fantastic way to end this movie. It like basically black screen, and I think that's part of the reason that this movie lasts. Now, this movie, I think, like, in terms of genre juggernauts like Halloween or Suspiria or Wicker Man, these other movies that are very important to the genre, I think that Blair Witch has its place, but does not necessarily have
It's not the best
rewatch.
entry in the category.
It's not, and but I also think that it doesn't have very much rewatch value, whereas I think the second one has a lot of rewatch value. And it's kind of cringy at times, but I think that's part of the charm, honestly.
And you pick up more things that you missed in the second one.
Yes.
Then the first one just becomes more and more clear that it's about hysteria and starvation in the woods as opposed
Essentially,
to supernatural.
which is a kind of one of those things that like I really loved about the making of this movie. Again, I'm fascinated by how this movie was made, and essentially like the this movie was essentially a treatment where they were just kind of like, we're just gonna do things to mess with you guys, and you guys can improvise and essentially just kind of bring it out. And I love the fact that you have three completely unknown people bringing this story to life, and this movie I think not only thrives on it because of the found footage aspect, but I think it also really thrives because of the tension where these are actual people that were like legitimately lost, legitimately starved, probably didn't sleep much. This movie was made all in like I think it's like 7 or 8 days, and absolutely crazy that this movie like just on how it was made.
Well, the third one was good too. The 2016. It was actually, I found it more interesting as a found footage than the original.
See, that is where I'm gonna have to strongly, strongly disagree with you. I was very, very let down by the 2016 one. I really wanted to like it because I liked the first two quite a lot. I was very surprised by how much I liked Book of Shadows. Maybe next year when Book of Shadows turns 25, we will cover it. Um, yeah, I was not a huge fan of it. Um,
I do, in all honesty, I do kind of want to get the VR game they put out. They put out a handful of games. A couple came out close to the release of like the first or second movie for computer, and then a couple of years ago they put out a couple horror movie based VR games, and the Blair Witch is one of them. It's supposedly fairly good. They also did a Exorcist one as well.
yeah, yeah. I'm not a video game guy, but I do want to. I have wanted to play this movie for a while. That game for a while because I really liked after kind of digging a little bit more into Blair Witch. Um, then again, I watched all three in one night when I ended up watching these. So, um,
You have a
yeah,
habit of doing that.
I do. Just just consuming everything in Book of yeah, yeah. Book of Shadows was just really entertaining. I liked the back and forth kind of stuff. I liked the supernatural element of it, but yeah. So Blair Witch Project. What are what are your thoughts on it like overall? Like, where does it land in the genre for you? Do you think it's kind of just an okay movie? Do you understand the hype that it gets?
It's it's okay. Um, I never really thought it was great. Uh, it does a lot of nothing for a long time, and that's my issue. As much as I like found footage, that's also my biggest issue with found footage is if they don't do anything to keep you engaged or do anything to kind of build towards the finale other than just fight and argue for an hour and a half, which is pretty much what this was. They're just arguing and fighting and wandering around the woods. Uh, they get kind of slow and get a bit kind of boring. And that's my biggest issue with this one is that it's like an hour and a half long. Everything takes place in like the last 10 minutes, and it's like an hour and 20 minutes of arguing, 10 minutes of anything actually happening. And seeing it the first time, it's not bad, but it to me it was never really one of the best.
Yeah, I think that it works really great. This is the second time I've seen it. The first time I was like, this is the second time I've seen it fully. I've tried to watch it on probably 4 or 5 occasions, and there are I feel like with other found footage films that we've gotten since, there is some sense of like Paranormal Activity is a great example because there you have a couple that I think have really great chemistry together, but also at the same time there is a level of comedy and humor and charisma that Micah it ends up bringing to that role as well as Kate. um, and whereas Blair Witch, it's when you watch the first few minutes until they kind of get lost in the woods, it kind of bounces around a lot and it kind of goes around from meeting the filmmakers and the crew, meeting these students, and then interviewing people in Burkittsville, Maryland about the Blair Witch legend, and then it kind of cuts back and forth, and that it almost kind of has this like disorienting feel to it that it takes some time to get used to. But once they kind of get into the woods, then you're kind of like, oh yeah, hey, it's this is this is interesting and kind of something I always see. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that this isn't the best example of the found footage genre if you're going to introduce to someone this, but this is definitely a tent pole within the horror genre as a whole.
I would probably go with Paranormal Activity to introduce somebody instead of the Blair Witch because of the way the Blair Witch just tends to kind of feel like it's just dragging on and nothing really happening.
I, I understand where you're coming from, but I also would probably say that I would show them this because this is the film that kind of defined the genre as we know it now.
I would
Um,
probably do it as a later entry.
that's fair. That's fair. But most people, this is kind of their introduction for this. And, Blair Witch also, too, I feel like is kind of one of those things that you either had to grow up in that era where you knew people who saw it or like that you could talk about, or uh maybe you caught Curse of Blair Witch on the Sci-Fi Channel. But eh, you know I don't think I think this is, but now it's kind of past. And Blair Witch, I think, is as a whole is able to be as a landmark as much as it is because of the because of a lot of like the marketing and a lot of the things that they were able to do, which you don't really
Yeah,
have films that have done it since, outside of maybe Paranormal Activity.
yeah. Well, Paranormal Activity didn't even really do it that well. The marketing aspect of it. I think Paranormal Activity might have been one of the ones that started showing the supposed test screening footage
They did,
of
yeah,
the
the green.
audience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of found footage over the years. A lot of found footage.
This
And
is Mark's wheelhouse, just in case you guys did not know that.
a lot of them have this same problem that this has. And it's just that it tends to drag on and they don't do enough to keep you engaged, or it feels like it's a color by numbers, a
Right.
paint by numbers,
So I
where
was gonna
they have the formula and we're going to follow the formula exactly, and there's
so I was
no kind of variation or anything.
so I was gonna respond to this originally when you said it, but I kind of got derailed. I think I understand where you're coming from, and I agree to an extent, but I think for a movie like The Blair Witch, you need that feeling of nothing, or that feeling of people traveling or people camping, or people talking outside about this legend. And I largely say that because I think it makes it feel a little bit more authentic. This movie is supposed to feel like a home movie that has kind of, gone bad, essentially. And I think to a degree that, given whatever you want to say about the problems of the movie, I think overall it is largely it is largely able to do that, and to do it fairly well. It's 25 years later, and we're still talking about this movie. We're having conversations about it largely with people that also may not necessarily be fans of the genre, are having conversations about Blair Witch, and maybe not about Hannibal, yeah, Hannibal Holocaust, or the McPherson tapes, the real kind of parents of the genre, but we're having it about this because this was the one that essentially kind of broke through to the masses and kind of put this subgenre on the
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
It was the first commercially successful.
Yes. And I think it was also the first one that we also saw a franchise out of, because we talked about the sequel that we got in 2000, Book of Shadows, the requel we got in 2016, the video games that we've talked about in this one so far. I think it was able to hit all of those notes and hit them successfully well.
Crap. It's been a long day.
I know.
Yeah, and I'm always, and it kind of pisses some people off, but just because something's commercially successful doesn't mean it's actually good. And that's where my biggest issue is with the movie, is that right there, when there's other better ones that just never got the attention or never got the coverage for whatever reason.
Well, I think for Blair Witch, it's interesting because I think that most people that are really like the genre in the ways that we do respect the Blair Witch for what it is. We might not necessarily agree that it is the best found footage film. I certainly don't. My favorite found footage film is a deep cut. um, but I
Which one
think
is that?
it is the Poughkeepsie tapes.
It was okay.
I,
A
I
lot
just
of people like that one. That's one I feel is a bit overrated.
I really like it, but again, anyways, but I also think for specifically for the Blair Witch, I think it's interesting because it has crafted this really niche group of individuals that very passionate about this film, and I'm glad that there are people out there that are very passionate about the films. I would kind of compare this to like I love Rob Zombie's second Halloween, and I know that it's not for everybody, but also at the same time, I know that the people that really love it. And that there is like this unspoken bond between people that really love that movie. And I feel like that's kind of the same exact way with the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, and I mean, you get today, you have complete festivals that revolve around found footage that would have
Hmm.
never happened without the success of the Blair Witch.
Yep.
Which I need to watch that one again, or do one of their virtual festivals again for the unnamed film festival.
Unnamed Film Festival. Yeah. Um,
I actually
yeah.
found one of my favorite found footage from that time we covered that.
1974. Great found footage film. Um,
That doesn't turn out to be what they make it out to be. It's the best part. Unless you're like me and know about that shit. So
yeah. Um, I just really just kind of want to jump into the legend real quick. So for those of you guys that don't know, so the legend revolves around the ghost of Ellie Kedwood, that I would basically describe somewhere as like a persecuted witch of the Salem witch trials mixed with Lila Rona.
La
I know I
Llorona.
Yeah, that one, the one that I can't pronounce. But according to the Wikipedia page, quote, the legend describes the killing and disappearances of some of the residents of Blair, Maryland, a fictitious town on the site of Burkittsville, Maryland, from the 18th to 20th centuries. Residents blamed these occurrences on the ghost of Ellie Kedwood, a Blair resident accused of practicing witchcraft in 1785 and sentenced to death by exposure. The Curse of Blair Witch presents the red legend as real, complete with manufactured newspapers, articles, newsreels, television, news reports, and stage interviews. End quote. This was this was actually a like an entire mythology that the directors Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Merck came up with in 1993, which I think is pretty freaking incredible. They fun fact real quick, there was 20 hours of footage that was shot and they edited it down to 82 minutes. Yeah,
I forgot what I was going to say. I was getting ready to say something about it and forgot.
it's
Oh,
fine.
I wonder if did it mention anything about any influence from like the Bell Witch or anything like that?
So they don't like not specifically in this article, but they do talk about the Bell Witch in the Curse of the Blair Witch that they did, the kind of like the historian aspects of it. So there is a minor overlap there as well.
Okay. Because I could see some possible influence from the whole Bell Witch situation, which they did do. I think it was American Haunting,
Yeah.
was based on the Bell Witch.
Yeah, I mean it's very possible. I think also this movie too, like when you talk about the conversation on mental health around these characters, I think this movie captures that isolation really well. And when you take into account how this movie was actually made, also with starvation and sleeplessness and just kind of just not knowing if you're gonna make it out alive. This movie, like the making of this movie, was like an insane process. But I think the mental health struggles really well in here. I think also too, like this movie captures in terms of mental health conversation. This is these three actors really embody what it's like to kind of go through this kind of isolation or just terrible circumstances. Really, I think they capture that really well.
I think it did better dealing with things like is it mass hysteria,
Hmm.
um, where certain events can trigger hysterics that quickly almost infects a group of people
Yeah.
in given situations. I think it did a better job depicting that than anything else. Whether it was meant to be or not, it was almost the underlying theme of the movie because it plays out in a manner where they fed into the hysteria and it almost is them fulfilling the story out of hysterics.
I don't know. I think it's this movie. This movie is a good movie to watch if you are, but also it's at the same time to go off of what you're talking about. I didn't have anything, and then it clicked. Uh, is this movie is just I think also type of like demonstrates the type of influence the media can have on your mental health and kind of like pretty much also on your outlook of life. Um, because one of the things that they talk about in the Curse of the Blair Witch is the fact that like the legend of the Blair Witch was kind of like not really known and like to people outside of Burkittsville, but like the exploration of it is kind of like open ended because are we actually seeing something that's like supernaturally taking place for one, or for two, are we also seeing I think the question also raises, or are we allowing what we've read and what we've been told to really dictate the way that we're actually seeing and experiencing a lot of the events of the film?
He's saying how much did the media and advertising influence the way you watch it? Is that what? Sorry, something just didn't click right there.
Yeah, no, I think you can definitely argue that there is that media, particularly where we kind of see it with Heather more than anything else, um, or arc throughout the course of this movie. But I think you could also make the argument that media as a whole has an effect on your mental health, whether it's the way that you see yourself and it presents in this body dysmorphia type of thing, or you believe lies that have been set up, that are, have influenced what you believe politically, religiously, mentally, all of these other things. I think there's an
Yeah,
open-endedness.
it's hard nowadays to talk about media influence without getting
Yeah.
into politics. It's
But I
almost impossible these days.
it is, but I think with this one there's an open-endedness to the ending of this movie to where you can kind of question what I'm seeing actually fact, or have the media or what they've been intaking, has that had an influence on what they're actually experiencing.
I think the vagueness of the ending leaves it open for interpretation. Was it the Blair Witch, or was it them in their hysteria and starvation and probably mild hypothermia, just hallucinating and going nuts?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it ends, is to leave that open for interpretation. The same way, like, Inception had the top scene at the end. Did it fall or did it keep going? Was he stuck in the dream world? Was he not?
For sure. That is it for the Blair Witch Project, unless there's anything you feel like we didn't cover adequately, Mark.
No, I think we're good. There's not a lot to the movie.
All right, well, you guys can see it for yourselves, along with the 2022 Best Feature winner from Horrific Hope, Apparitions, the debut of the last movie ever made, alongside a plethora of short films from the first 2 years of Horrific Hope, as well as all of the wonderful community partners, great catering done to us by Con Salsa, very, very good Venezuelan food. And then once again, our spooky vendors for this show and sponsors as well. Moonstone Menagerie. And once again, our sponsors for this event, as well as the spooky vendors that are going to be there: Moonstone Menagerie, Love Always KB, and Witchcraft Studios. The fun kicks off at the Richmond Public Library at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You guys can come join us for all of the movies. And if you guys, 25 years of Blair Witch, what did you guys think about it? Are you guys on Mark's side? You guys on my side? You guys on neither side? Anyways, until next time, remember, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.